for the 11th of May 2023 in the morning, and I've just been spending a few days in the German mountains to appease myself. I've been working on gathering and sharing knowledge about economics, but I need to be in a more peaceful, calm environment, one might say. And here it's not especially beautiful because I am not able to move around, so I cannot choose a comfortable spot with a great view. But I chose a bench where I can sit. Yeah, I do not have the opportunity to be in the forest or in the mountain very often because of my physical limitations, but yeah. I've been reading Austrian economics, obviously, but also a little bit of European romantic poetry, and there really is, one might say, a universal European soul, in the sense that historically at the turn of the 18th and early 19th century, Romanticism developed and spread in Germany in the 1790s and the early decades of the 19th century, in England as well, in the first half of the 19th century, in France. In America, it was not strictly speaking of Romanticism, although the Transcendentalist movement with Emerson and Thoreau, and partly, one might say, Edgar Allan Poe and Melville, it's partly romantic in the broadest sense of awe and admiration for nature, for the natural world. But actually nature is the spatio-temporal world, but for the living natural world, the non-human living natural world, a feeling of awe and wonder at the sublime, the majestic aspect of what is called nature. And in today's world, Matthew Segall, Footnotes to Plato, I've bought most of his books. I haven't had the time to read them thoroughly, but he's an American, white American with Jewish origins, partly that's what he said, but he is a modern proponent of romantic philosophy, Schellingian view. And I believe that Europeans have in their soul, Europeans, mere white people, a special connection to nature. I'm not saying that others don't, because there have been, one might say, cosmic approaches to religion in most primitive tribes, and here primitive is not derogatory, but the native tribes of the American continent, but partly the shamanic, tribalistic religions of most native populations in Africa, Australia, Asia, etc. But Europeans, they have a more, how should I define this? I don't know, but the tradition is more developed, more rich, more profound, one might say. There is a spontaneous awe at the beauty sometimes of the natural world, and the distinction between Romanticism and one might say, the Anglo-Saxon mind would be that Romanticism is more of a movement, a product of the soul, a unity of the soul with the cosmos. One might say, I simplify. It's an appeal of the soul. It's a feeling. It's not devoid of thought, because precisely the Romantics, whether the intellectuals, the writers, the philosophers, the painters, they were great intellectuals. I've been reading Novalis and Wordsworth, but it's the case also with Lamartine, Emerson, and Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau. They cannot be classified as romantic, but here that's just a literary distinction. It's not really important, but they were great intellectuals, of course, but their love and wonder and connection with the cosmos and beautiful landscapes and natural, here it means not artificially modified or not too much modified by human action, one might say. It was a movement of subjectivity and feelings, whereas the realm of the mind, which is more abstract, more dry, what I sometimes call the Anglo-Saxon mind, it deals with topics of objective spirit, economics, sociology, politics, history, technology, etc., etc., whereas Romanticism is more the natural connections, namely nature understood as the living, non-human physical world, plants, ecological environments, animals, one might say, and even a cosmic or organic view of astronomy, the connection of man in the entire cosmos, the unity of the human soul with the cosmic soul, the world soul, as Schelling would call this, or the cosmic organism. I discovered a Bulgarian spiritual leader whose name I forgot, but yeah, a Bulgarian, so partly European, who talked about the man within the cosmic organism. So yeah, but Romanticism is partly tied with the natural determinations of the universe, but of man as well. That's why there's an emphasis on the people from sometimes an ethnic standpoint. That's why Romanticism has been tied with nationalism, but also with psychology, the individual psyche, or the collective unconscious, as they call this, the collective archetypes or the collective psyche. But it's more in tune with emotions, feelings, imagination, representation, the inner, the inward quest, one might say. It's an inward movement, whereas the ideals of the Enlightenment, which have been the product historically of the Scots, the French, the English predominantly, partly the German as well, they are more objective in the sense of abstract, a work of der Verstand, a work of the understanding, abstract universality, and they focus more on topics of Objektiver Geist, like I said, economics, sociology, the production and distribution of wealth, political organizing, etc., etc. It's more bland and dry, but yeah, so Austrian economics, it's not very romantic, one might say, but it's satisfying for the intellect, but it's kind of a little bit, I wouldn't say soulless, that would be a wrong accusation, but it's not really exciting from the point of view of the soul. It's exciting intellectually, but it's kind of lacking. But a pure emotional form of Romanticism is lacking as well. And I'm intelligent enough, I understood this more than 5 years ago, that precisely Hegel historically represents the unity of Romanticism and the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment is a philosophy, I simplify, of separation, man separated from his community, a detached individualism, which can have very good effects in terms of creativity, independence, autonomy, energy, dynamism, but also a negative separation in the sense of a tearing down of community life, a loss of community life. But Romanticism has an organic view of the cosmos, but also of human society. That's why it's so appealing for. That's why the nationalists who have a culture, they find Romanticism appealing, because it promotes an organic view, not only of the cosmos but of society, where the people is thought of as a unit, and as a cultural, ethnic, linguistic, religious unity. But the risk is the irrational aspect. Romanticism was kind of a revolt against the blend, in the historical context at the end of the 18th and early 19th century, a revolt against the bland, dry, boring aspect of the Enlightenment. Newton, Descartes, Locke, Hume, Kant, and all the Adam Smith, in a way, not really, but the capitalist, individualist in the negative sense from the perspective of the Romantics, because the Romantics, they can promote individualism as well, the wealth of the individual soul, the genius, as opposed to the standardized masses. So Romanticism has a collective, or even a collectivist aspect, but an individualist aspect as well. The great Romantic poets, they were exceptional individuals. Novalis, Wordsworth, Byron, Lamartine, and even in a way, here the classifications is difficult, but these were exceptional individuals. Yeah. And I know that, how should I explain this? I feel, as an individual here, that's a personal opinion. It's not an opinion, it's a personal fact. I feel better in the forest than anywhere else in terms of landscape. Here it's not really the forest, because it's a park. Built by state decree and financed by taxes. There are not a lot of people, because it's a kind of void, empty park. So here, I've been reading Austrian economics for 3 days thoroughly. That's a misallocation of resources. That's malinvestment. The government does nothing but malinvestments, because it doesn't satisfy the wishes of consumers. It imposes coerced decision in terms of allocation of resources. So that's an example of malinvestment, because I'm not sure that there are a lot of people who come here, but the good aspect is that without this government-financed little park, I couldn't be able to sit to record with my camera. What was I saying? I feel better in the mountain, in the forest, especially if these are German forests, and this is the case here. It's historically German territory. And of course, existence is sometimes very difficult, but just to be able to appreciate the presence in the world by just sitting outside. Of course, if you live in a crowded city, it's difficult, but in a non-urbanized or a not excessively urbanized environment, and just to appreciate the presence of the cosmos, one might say. I try to be complete in a sense that I know that people, they are not interested in economics, which is kind of frustrating because precisely people are interested in wealth and prosperity and the economy, but they are not interested in economics, which means that they make a lot of wrong decisions by trusting politicians, by allowing stupid, wasteful political economic policies to be implemented, but they do not care about the theoretical aspect, so they get deceived all the time and fooled and manipulated, which is kind of frustrating when you understand the trick. But in a way, my view is clear. Politics and economics are kind of a waste of time and waste of energy, because to appreciate existence, in a way, it's kind of easy if you have the opportunity just to sit outside and to sometimes, yeah, that's the romantic view. It cannot always be valid because escapism is not an option. It can appease and appeal, but it's not a political view. You cannot just promote escapism in nature. That's kind of delusional for the aristocratic poet, maybe. It has to be encouraged as often as possible, but you cannot found or maintain a political unit which, no matter how corrupt politics might be, it's still necessary here in the sense, I'm not talking about politicians' politics, but simply to have a theory and a way of organizing human interactions. That's why I get interested in topics which spontaneously I'm not fascinated by economics, but the Austrian, they succeed in making economic theory very interesting because it's rigorous, it's coherent, it's interesting, it's complete, it's consistent, it's clear, it's challenging, but in a good way. Yeah, because you cannot be, if you want to be a serious thinker, you cannot be, you have to have views, at least not, I wouldn't say superficial, but fundamental. Yeah, superficial and fundamental do not mean the same. Fundamental means you have to understand at least the fundamental determination of all the aspect of existence and of the cosmos, one might say. So you have to be knowledgeable in, at least in the fundamental determination in all the aspects, the natural sciences, the social sciences, what in my own language would be nature philosophy, the philosophy of nature, and then subjective, objective, and Absoluter Geist. So not caring about economics is not an option in a way. Yeah. And my view, actually, here that I express an opinion, so it's not very important in a way, but my view of a good policy or a good city, not in the sense of urbanized city, in a sense of the sense that political theory gives to the word city, namely the geographical coexistence of humans. Not the urban city, but the how should I explain this? The living together, one might say. Yeah, of course, I'm no longer an immature leftist on this aspect. Namely, I have no problem. I have no moral problem with people who are genuinely interested in wealth, because I am intelligent enough to know that the internet, computers, and a lot of good aspect about modern technology is owed to the wealth and maybe sometimes the greed of the capitalist. But actually, I have no moral problem with this. People who want to accumulate wealth on the free market, if they are not crony capitalists, if they do not steal the money from the people or through scheming and corruption and manipulation, I have no moral problems. I have no resentment against the rich, no matter how rich they might be, if they do not use their power and influence to corrupt the state, to enforce regulation, etc. If they are rich because they sell products on the free market, I have no problem. And even that's good. That's good that there are rich people and ambitious people, even if it's very easy to downgrade, to say, oh, they are just greedy. No, it's a very narrow, immature leftist views, which is often found in right-wing circles because they try to appeal to some sort of a socialist instinct of the herd. Yeah. So I have no problem with capitalist wealth, but my view nonetheless is that a free society ought to, not necessarily to encourage, but at least to allow its citizens, some of them at least, to have really a simple life. And my view of wealth is predominantly scientific and cultural and spiritual, not materialistic, but I'm intelligent enough to know that in order for scientific, spiritual, cultural wealth to develop, there has to be material prosperity, at least to a certain extent. And that's why the United States of America, they are the countries of a lot of excesses in terms of economics, one might say, but it's a society which allows and grants its citizens the right to live a very simple life, like the Amish, or if there is not too much state regulation, America is supposed to grant its citizens the right to live on a farm, to have a simple life, to be autonomous, self-sufficient, etc., etc. And there are still many Americans who are relatively autonomous and self-sufficient sometimes in the southern part of the country or the northern part, in the middle, one might say. The east and west coast are very crowded with very big cities and megapoles, etc. But the least or the less densely populated areas, there is still a relative amount of autonomy and self-organizing communities who, in spite of the bureaucratic regulations. Yeah. And here, I've already made this remark, but the customs and manners and character of a people is partly determined anthropologically and sociobiologically, but it's also partly, of course, economic and cultural, but also it's partly sociological and urbanistic, in a sense that if you change the quantity, a quantitative change in terms of inhabitants per square mile, it changes the quality, to a certain extent, it changes the qualitative aspect of customs, in a sense that, here I illustrate, as the logic of quantity turning into quality measure. In small villages, people, they live closer to one another. There is less economic dynamism, in a way. So time, life, social life is more slow. People, usually they have been there for decades, sometimes in old Europe, in the small villages, most of the inhabitants, they have lived there for a very long time, sometimes for generations. And therefore, a lot of people, they know one another. It's less and less the case with the movement of people enabled by the development of technology and the means of transportation, but still, in a lot of villages, the people, most of them, they know one another, even if it is superficially, for years and sometimes for generations. The parents know the children, the grandparents, etc., etc. So it incentivizes mutual respect. There can be the negative aspect of gossip, etc., but it encourages mutual self-respect because the people, they are rooted in a longer tradition, whereas in big cities or even minor cities, the people, they come and go, they move, sometimes they just stay for a few months or a few years, and then they move around. The jobs, they change very fast. People are crowded in buildings, etc., etc. So they occupy. There are a lot of people in a tiny space. So it encourages different sets of social interactions. There is less connection between the people, but because they do not know one another. There is more diversity. It can be ethnic, but also cultural or sociological, which has sometimes its good aspect, but it can have its negative aspect as well. The relationships, they are less stable. There is less politeness because there is not the fear of one's reputation, because people can change and move around very fast, so they do not care about their reputation. Whereas in a village where people have known one another and families have been acquainted for sometimes many generations, there is the reputation of the parents, the great parents, so people are encouraged by social pressure to behave in a respectable way, in a way which can be alienating, but it is also what can enable, if it's properly balanced, to behave decently, one might say. Whereas in big cities, people, they are overcrowded, they don't know one another, so it gives a strong incentive. So here I do not blame the people. I understand the sociological determinism. It gives a strong incentive not to care about one's own neighbors in the broadest sense. It encourages a lack of trust, a lack of politeness, a lack of care, a lack of healthy social relations, etc., etc. So yeah. So there is, of course, a geographical and sociological divide in most Western countries, actually in all countries. I mean, the overall majority of countries on this land, between the rural population and the urban population. And this divide is first geographic, but then also sociological, also partly anthropological, because people living here, I cannot back this up with statistics, but usually people living in the city, they are younger, they can be much wealthier, but also much poorer in a way, but with the modern welfare state. Here I know this is a singular case of France, but I can deduce that it's also the case in most other Western countries. The very poor people, they are said to live in the cities, but actually they receive an enormous amount of welfare redistribution, whereas the really poor, actually they live in the rural areas because there is no economic activity and they do not receive as many welfare redistribution, because the so-called poor, they live in the urbanized areas, but this is also where most of the wealth is created, because they are the most dynamic, most intelligent, most skilled people in the city, in the big cities, who create a lot of wealth. So the poor and the very rich, they live together, and therefore there is more money to be redistributed on the regional or local level, if it's more or less federal, yeah. So actually they are not that poor, because here I know the singular case of France, the suburbs. I know that in the US the suburbs is where the rich people live, and the inner city is where the poor live. In France that's kind of the opposite. The suburbs in the big cities is where the really less qualified, most deprived population live. Sometimes, or most of the time, it's ethnic diversity, because native people, they tend to flee due to the difficulty of cultural harmony, one might say, when the numbers are significant. So the suburbs, which in a French context mean poor people, they receive a lot of welfare redistribution in terms of infrastructure or paychecks, etc. Whereas the poor people in the rural areas, less so, because their area is less economically dynamic, because the most intelligent, they leave the rural areas to go in the cities, but then also I know that sometimes they go back to the rural areas because it's cheaper, because it's more calm. If they are really intelligent, if they can work on their computer, etc., they tend to prefer more calm environments than the stress and the exhaustion and the pollution and the degradation of the city. So yeah, but yeah, what I wanted to say is that, of course, behaviors, customs, on a collective level, they are sociologically determined by urbanization and geography. Partly, it's not enough, but yeah, all the aspects, anthropology, the demographics here, it means the age, the level of intelligence, the skills and degrees and diplomas, they have to be taken into account, but also the sociology. Yeah, that's why here there are people, usually right-wing reactionaries, who have really a romantic view of the people, but here in the negative sense of romanticism, they idealize, in the naive and delusional sense, they idealize the people, the historical people, to downgrade the modern people, not only or not necessarily in terms of ethnicity, but the city dwellers, one might say. So they idealize the rural population to downgrade the city dwellers, which it can be partly true, but they tend to miss the sociological determinism. Of course, ideally, it would be good to have less crowded cities, because it brings about ghettos or slums. Yeah, but the old lifestyle in really closely knit villages or towns, it has a lot of good aspects, but negative aspects as well, because it grants much less freedom to individuals, because there's peer pressure, etc., etc. So there is the good and the bad in the city and in the rural areas. Yeah, but just to sometimes to go outside and to be able to appreciate. Yeah, it's not really the forest, like I said, because I cannot really walk in the forest, at least not with my camera. But yeah, it does a whole lot of good. Yeah. Sometimes I need to recharge. I haven't been on a holiday. I've been working, and I will continue to do so. But working in a natural environment. Here, natural means not too urbanized. Yeah, it's really appeasing, and yeah. There is a river just here, but I cannot. Okay, I will try. I will try to move with my computer while filming the river, but it's kind of difficult because of the terrain. But I will try. I will try just to record images of the river, but I have to bring my computer with me. Is it possible? Well, no, it's too. No, I will try. But yeah. I do not want to edit too much, so yeah. Just want to. Yeah. Do we see? Yeah. Okay. I will stop the video here. That was the morning talk. Just